Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to apply the SAFE, an acronym that I use, to the multiple attackers when you're posed by multiple attackers. Now, first thing you want to start to consider here is fight or flight. What's going to help you to determine whether you want to flight, which means run away, or to actually fight, is the proximity of the attackers. Now, what I determine here with my two attackers standing in front of me here, I'm in a flight zone. They're a good 8, 10, maybe even 12 feet away from me. Okay? I don't feel that they're in a threatening type posture while standing in front of me at this distance. If my first impression tells me, you know what, it's time to go, I'm going to go, I'm going to look for my escape, I'm either going to run out through an exit or I'm going to turn and run away from them. Okay, not just turning tail right away, exposing my back and running away, but I'm going to back away until I'm in an even safer distance from them, and then I'm going to go. So at this distance, we're in a flight distance. Now, as they will move closer towards me, get 10, 8 feet from me, now I have a choice. I have to determine what their posture is. Are they in a threatening posture, or are they in a non-threatening posture? Are they looking like they're going to jump me or accost me or try to fight me? I have to determine this, and I have to determine this quickly. Okay? They could be two guys that are very angry at me because I jumped in front of their pool game at the bar. Or they could be two guys from Seattle looking for directions to Starbucks. Okay? So I have to watch that. Now, I have to determine whether I want to fight or flight based upon my assessment of what their posture is. Now, the next one, as they move forward towards me, this is the fight zone. Okay? This is red. Warning, Will Robinson. Everything, all my warning bells and signals and everything are going off on me. I have to fight from this position now. Because even if I try to turn or back up, get into a safer position and try to run away, my backward speed is going to be slower than their advancing attacker speed, whether I'm with my back towards them or if I'm still facing them. So now I have to fight. From here, I'll use a preemptive strike if I feel that my threat assessment is telling me that they're going to attack based upon their posture. I mean, Jeff is standing here in a sideways stance. He's definitely in a fight type, in a fighting stance. Chris is standing in a fighting stance as well. If they were squared up towards me, just facing me, and their hands are in front of them or behind them or hands on their hips, okay, this is not quite as threatening, but I'm still going to assess the situation. So this is my red zone. I'm gonna fight. I have to. So now is when I have to determine if I'm not going to wait, but I have to determine what my initial preemptive strikes are going to be, how I'm going to assess who I'm going to hit first, and then I'm going to have to think about what I'm going to do after that. Okay, we're in the red zone. We're in the fight zone. I have no choice, but I have to fight to get out of this situation. They're standing within close proximity to me. They're standing in a threatening in a threatening posture where they're standing sideways, hands are to the side. They're clenching their eyes towards me. I know these guys are bad. My first impression is telling me they are going to act. I need to act first. One thing that I want you to consider is that throwing the punch as your initial strike, your preemptive strike, may not be a good idea. Unless you're conditioned as a martial artist or a boxer, you've got calcification of your wrist, the bones in your forearm, you know how to properly hold your punch in order to hit a target. If you're conditioned for that, go ahead, give it a try. However, in my opinion, it's not always the go-to technique. I want to keep a safe distance as much as possible. So I'm going to go with a long-range technique. In my opinion, there are 5 very powerful techniques that you can use in a multiple attacker situation, and I'm going to show you those. The 5 most effective techniques to throw in a multiple attacker type situation are going to be, first and foremost, long-range techniques, front kicks. Okay? The longer you can throw a technique from, the more powerful it's going to be. The further away you are from the attacker, the more safe you're going to be. Now, the first one that I'm going to show you is going to be a front kick, and it's going to be a front kick to the groin. When I throw the front kick, what I want to do is I want to add extra emphasis and extra power into this technique by what we call in Israeli Krav Maga, the glisha. Now a glisha is when I'm going to rotate my hips forward into the technique by pivoting on the ball of my foot of my base leg. Okay, so Jeff's going to hold the pad down in front of me, and what I'm going to do, he's holding the pad here at groin height level. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I make this technique, and I don't want to step back into a fighting stance and then have to throw the technique. I need to develop this type of technique from a neutral position. Okay, I need to act quickly. I need to go from 0 to 10 in a very short time. Now, taking into consideration the target that I'm choosing, which is the groin, I don't necessarily have to hit it as hard as I can. It's a very highly sensitive type target, and it will elicit a very quick response from the attacker. So as I make this kick, and I'm going to do it slowly first, I'm going to pick my foot up off of the floor, not really chambering here in order to make the kick. I want to pick my foot up and strike into the target. So as I'm from here, my hands can be up. I can say, hey, listen, guys, I really don't want to fight. I choose to make my preemptive strike here. Striking into the groin area as my target, highly sensitive. All right? So as I'm up, my foot comes up, my hip and shoulders rotate forward into the target, but I'm pivoting on my base leg, on the ball of my foot on my base leg, in order to roll my hips into the technique. Okay, so one more time as I'm here. I'm up and into the target. Up and into the target. Left and right side development is also crucial. Okay, our second technique, which I would employ in a multiple attacker type situation, is going to be the knee strike. What I want to do is I want to focus on highly effective, highly efficient, devastating type techniques which are going to elicit an immediate reaction from an attacker. So my next technique that I'm going to use is the knee strike. A knee strike, in my opinion, is just a shortened version of a front kick. It's something that you employ in a very close quarters type situation, close proximity with the attacker, where you can't employ a front kick, you have to go with the knee strike. Striking with the knee, what I like to do, there's two striking areas on the knee. One is on the top side of my leg here like this, the upper part of my knee. I'm going to strike up into the groin area with that. Again, highly sensitive target area, striking into the genitals, into the groin, is going to elicit an immediate reaction from the attacker. So even just a short knee strike here like this will be effective. Won't be effective enough to take them out, but it will definitely distract them enough in order to give me the opportunity to get away or focus attention on the second attacker. The other part of my knee that I'm going to use is the front side of my knee here along the kneecap, and I'm going to use that as a thrusting technique, pushing forward into the front side of the abdomen, right just below the belt buckle and the waistline, into the pelvic area. Now, there's an organs behind the pelvis, the bladder is located there, lower part of the intestine, all which will elicit pain. Also, striking into the pelvis is going to be very effective because it causes a lot of pain when it's struck properly. So, what I'm going to do when I use the thrusting knee strike on an advancing opponent is I'm going to employ the glisha movement as well by rotating my hip forward, pivoting on the ball of my foot so that I'm bringing my force forward into the target. So as Chris is coming in, what I want to do is I want him to advance here towards me. He's going to hit with full force into me. That's why I need to be thrusting forward into him so that I'm balanced when he makes contact with me. So as Chris comes forward, I'm just going to reach out and strike with the knee as he's coming in, rotating on the ball of my base foot. So as he comes, I'm meeting him with his force with my knee strike. Okay? So this is the thrusting knee strike. Very devastating. Our next technique is going to be the back kick. When you are in a multiple attacker situation, you never want to turn your back towards any of them. Either of the attackers getting behind you is going to spell disaster for you because you do not have eyes behind your head. Now, one of the first things that we're taught when you're around horses, if you've ever been around horses, to never walk around behind a horse because the horse will get spooked and it will kick. Horse kicks, back kicks and that nature are very strong techniques, and if they make contact, they will destroy or devastate what's behind them. Now, in this type of scenario, when we're dealing with multiple attackers, having an attacker coming up from behind you will most assuredly spell disaster for you. So there are techniques that we can use. The pad kick is going to be one of them. So as I'm standing here and I'm posed with Chris, now Chris and I are right now on a one-on-one type situation. However, Chris has a friend who is going to be coming in from behind because he sees me as the aggressor with Chris. I pick this up and I'm going to strike with the back kick into the target. Now when I make this back kick, I want to make sure that I am striking into the target area. I don't want to miss. So one way that I do that is that when I turn and I perceive the attack coming from behind, I need to pick up my target with both of my eyes. In order to do that, I need to turn my body. Now, I'm sort of turning away from the attacker here, but the attacker coming from behind is the more pressing threat. I turn and I look with both of my eyes, and I tuck my chin to my shoulder here so that I don't expose my head. If I were to just merely turn and look here and the second attacker's running in and he goes to throw a punch, my face is open and I'm going to catch it, okay, taking me out of the fight. I can protect my jawline and my face by looking around my shoulder with both of my eyes. I don't turn my body here like this because then I won't be able to employ an effective and efficient back kick. So as I turn and I look, I pick my knee up and kick straight back into the target. I don't want to turn it into a side kick because then it won't be as effective as a technique, as opposed to kicking straight back because of the muscle groups that I will use. So as I step, boom, I throw the back kick here, and then I would come back in to the target in front of me with the same leg and employ a front kick to the groin. Okay, we are now in the striking range. A couple of the techniques that I'm going to talk about right now are going to be the punch and the palm heel strike and the elbow strike. While you're in close proximity with somebody, sometimes a shorter range technique such as the elbow strike or a palm heel strike is going to be far more effective than trying to throw that long range punch technique. When I talk about multiple attackers, I want you to remain safe. One of the things in order to ensure your safety is that you do not damage yourself. Throwing a technique in which you're going to injure yourself will take you out of the fight. Throwing a strike such as the punch, if your hand is not conditioned for it, your wrist is not in the proper position for it, the attacker perceives the punch coming and you hit them in their skull and you damage your hand, you are going to take yourself out of the fight. Another thing we want to talk about when you're dealing with multiple attackers is using your surroundings. So if your hand is damaged and you can't pick up a stick and start swinging in order to remain safe, you're going to take yourself out of the fight. So for the close proximity right now, the first one I'm going to talk about is a very devastating technique, which is the short-range elbow strike. Now, when you make this elbow strike, you want to go from an upward to a downward type striking angle so that you're able to add your body weight behind it in order to add extra emphasis and power into the strike. So Jeff's going to hold the target here. What I like to target when I'm targeting an elbow strike in close proximity is somewhere here into the clavicle, here to the side of the head. If I make a knee strike and I pull him down, I'm going to strike to the back of his head in order to elicit an even greater response from him, because as my weight is coming from up to down and I strike him in the head, where the head goes, the body follows, he will go down to the ground. The more time he spends getting himself up off of the ground, the more time I get to spend with the second attacker. So, as I make this elbow strike, I want to go from up to down. I'm going to bring my arm up. I want to strike with this part of my arm right here. If I take my pinky finger and put it on my elbow point, these 4 fingers extending from the point of my elbow down is my striking area. I don't want to come down here. I don't want to hit it with the point because this is where I will create damage. So as I'm making my strike, I'll come up and down into the target. I'm throwing it like a punch where I'm rotating my hips and shoulders to come into the target from here, but as I'm stepping in, I'm coming from up to down in order to put body weight behind my technique. This is what makes it effective. So as I'm here, up to down, into the target, into the collarbone, or into the jaw. What I next want to talk about is the palm heel strike. Okay? If I'm going to throw a punch at somebody, say as I go to throw the punch and Jeff perceives the punch coming and he tucks his chin and I strike onto his forehead. If my wrist is bent here in any way, it's going to come forward. Okay? My hand is going to drop down and I run the potential of spraining my wrist, taking myself out of the fight that way. If he doesn't break down and I damage my wrist and he tucks his chin and I hit his skull here, hardest part of the skull is here at the crown. Okay? If I strike that with my hand, I could potentially damage the knuckles or break the bones in the back of my hand, preventing me from being able to grip anything or, most importantly, continue to hold my fist. Okay? If I strike with my right hand, I damage my right hand, I take myself out of the fight. I prefer to use a palm heel strike. Now, when I'm using the palm heel strike, I'm hitting with the heel of my palm here. Even if you're not an experienced striker, you haven't thrown thousands and thousands of punches after years and years of martial arts training, this is still an instinctual type striking technique. When you're striking with this, the risk of damage to your hand is going to be limited because there's no bending parts here, especially if I'm striking with the bottom part of my hand. This technique does come and is included in most traditional martial arts programs. However, it's not really emphasized. Everybody wants a nice fancy punch. This right here is like poking somebody in the face with a baseball bat. You can strike to the head, you can strike to the body, you can strike into the pelvic area, you can strike to the groin, you can strike to the side of the leg if you end up on your knees and on the ground. Still very effective. So as I'm making this palm heel strike, I want to strike into the face. And I'm going to throw it, and I like to step forward with the same leg as my striking hand as I make this so that I create more force. If I strike into the chin, the head goes back, the body falls away. May not knock him out, take him out of the fight, but it will definitely distract him and give me time. If I strike into the nose, okay, going to break the nose, going to elicit a lot of pain, involuntary reaction to bring the hands up into the face as the eyes start to water and blood rushes down the nose. Distraction allows me to spend more time with him or the second attacker. I can strike into the body. I'm going to step forward, strike with my palm heel strike into the floating rib. Okay? The bottom part of the ribs are a lot easier to break than the higher ones. If I can strike to the front of the solar plexus here, that's effective for me as well. If I strike up here into the chest plate, it's effective for me as well. I can also, if I get tied up, if he grabs me around the body, I can use my palm heel strike as opposed to using a punch here to strike into the kidneys and into the lower ribs, okay, to get him away from me. If he grabs me from around the front, I can strike down here into the groin on a downward movement onto the front side of the pelvis, or if I catch any of the genitals, I again will elicit an immediate response from him because it's a very sensitive area. If I end up on my knees, down to the ground, I can strike to the side of the leg here. Don't really want to punch here because the knee and the leg is very hard. But if I strike with my palm heel strike here to the side of the leg, he starts to bend. I can grab him and pull him down to the ground and finish the fight him from here, or get up and quickly move to the second attack again. Palm heel strike, far more effective than a punch. Far more safe as a technique where you won't damage yourself and keep you in the fight. Okay, what I want to go into now is I want to go into the application of these techniques that I just went through while dealing with multiple attackers. When you're posed with a threat from a single attacker, principles are a little bit different there. Legally, there are some different considerations taken into account when you act in self-defense. However, when you're dealing with multiple attackers, it's a whole separate ballgame. It's a different set of principles, and there are a whole lot of different types of considerations you have to take in order to act in a self-defense and safe nature. Okay, who am I going to strike first? Depending upon my situation here as I'm posed with multiple attackers, who am I going to strike first? And why do I strike first? Now, the consideration is given as opposed to when I'm dealing with a single attacker. When I'm dealing with multiple attackers, I have to take into consideration if my first impression is telling me, am I in danger of receiving and being perpetrated upon with grievous and bodily harm? It's a legal term, it's very long. Basically, if I feel that these guys are going to attack me and I'm going to be hurt, I am within my right in order to use a preemptive strike, using the rule of preeminence, in order to defend myself. Now, who am I going to strike first? And why would I want to strike this person first? If I'm dealing with two unarmed attackers, I want to strike the person who's closest to me. Okay? He's within close proximity to me. I'm going to strike him. I want to use a long-range technique in order to keep safe distance from the second attacker as well. So as I'm positioned here in front of Chris and in front of Jeff, I'm going to strike Jeff first. He's closest to me. I'm going to let him have it first. I'm going to deliver a technique that's going to take him out of the situation briefly enough in order for me to deal with the second attacker, who's going to be closing the distance on me as soon as I react to the first attacker. Now, when I'm looking at these attackers, I also need to take into consideration, do they have any weapons? Okay? One of them may have a knife. One may have a stick. One may have a gun, a broken bottle, whatever the case is. I need to look quickly at the different weapons in which they have. I might not even know that he has a weapon. Jeff is holding his hand behind his right hip right now. I have to presume that he's got a knife in his hand. Okay? He's hiding it from me. He's shielding it from me. He's trying to wish to surprise me with it. Chris has both of his hands behind his back. I'm going to presume he has nothing in his hands. If he had a stick in his hand, just his right hand would be back. These are just things that you pick up as tells. Okay? So, if I'm dealing with a weapon wielder, I need to take the weapon wielder out of the equation first. Now, depending upon what type of weapon it is, if it's a short-range weapon, such as a knife, or a long-range weapon, such as a stick or a gun, I need to determine which one I want to take out first. So if a long-range weapon is presented as one of the weapons, I want to take that weapon out first before I take out the close-range weapon. Because if I engage with the close-range weapon, the long-range weapon will be able to attack me from further away, not allowing me to get in and to effectively defend him. As opposed to if I deal with the long-range weapon first, the close-range weapon has to come in and be in closer proximity to me in order to be effective. So as he's trying to attack me, I can use the second or the first attacker with the long-range weapon to put him in between me, and we will talk about movement and positioning and stacking in the next segment. Now I've chosen who I'm going to strike first with my initial strike. My first impression tells me I need to strike. After I make my first strike, I need to move. And movement here is the key. I want to move in such a fashion with circular, semicircular movements so that I keep one of the attackers between me and the furthest attacker, who in this case will be the individual that I struck first. So as I'm posed here with Jeff and Chris, I'm going to choose to strike Jeff because they're unarmed attackers. Jeff is closest to me. I'm going to strike into Jeff here into the groin. Quickly close my distance on Chris with my second strike. I'm going to now grab him behind the head to control him, positioning me in between Jeff and myself. While I'm here engaged with him, I'm going to give a couple of knee strikes into here, and I'm going to move. And I'm going to move in such a way so that I keep one of them between me and the furthest attacker. Continually moving. The less time I have to spend engaged with them, the safer I'm going to be. As part of movement in dealing with multiple attackers, one of the things that you want to ensure that you do not do is to get cornered. You don't want to get cornered into a position where you don't have an escape. What you also want to ensure is that when you get cornered, you don't want to have to split between the two attackers. Okay? So, as I'm here and I pose with my multiple attacker scenario again, I'm going to make my first initial strike to the closest attacker into the second attacker, and I'm going to control, deliver my knee strikes. Now, from here, what's going to happen is I'm backing myself up into the corner. I don't want to go into the corner, okay? Because from here, say, for instance, I disengage from Chris and I back up. Jeff is now recovered, and I'm in the corner. He's to my right, he's here to my left. I can't go this way because I'm walking into here. I can't go this way because Jeff's already here. I can't go through the middle because they're both there. This is why you don't want to get cornered, and it's important that you keep your feet moving in a circular motion, okay? So, the other key component here is when you're engaged with one of the attackers, you can use him as a block against the other person. So as I'm here again in multiple attacker, initial strike, second strike, I come through here, Jeff is recovering, I'm going to use Chris as a block to throw him into Jeff so that I can get away safely and not get cornered. First strike, second strike. In some systems, you'll see the first strike perpetrated against the first attacker and then using that person as the shield or as an object between you and the second attacker, such as this. Boom, and I strike him and I bring him around. Now, the problem with this is I'm moving him around. I cannot put as much technique onto him to continue the fight against him as I want to because my second attacker's fresh. He's not moving in a diminished capacity at all. He's moving around because I haven't hit him yet. So, what I like to do and what we like to do within Krav Maga is we go after the first attacker and quickly into the second attacker, boom, first strike, second strike, and then I move him around. As I'm working on him, he's recovering from his first strike in a diminished capacity. I turn, boom, I'm back into him. I can give him whatever I need, coming back here into the first, second attacker again, and finishing from here. One thing that I want to discuss with you dealing with multiple attackers is not getting locked up. What I mean by locked up is don't get too engaged into one of the attackers. Don't try to use fancy headlocks, wrapping up of the arms and stuff like that, because what happens is if they can get a hold of you, can get a hold of them like that, they can get a hold of you. So as I'm in the situation, first strike, second strike, and I come through and I want to grab Jeff here like this in a headlock. Yeah, it's effective. But look at where his hand is. He's got a hold of my knee. His other arm's sheared behind my body. Okay? I'm locked up into him. He's locked up into me. He's got a hold of me. Here comes Chris. He's now diminished my movement, and I can continue to get struck.
Multiple attackers in ground fighting. While it is said that 9 out of 10 fights will end up on the ground, either by the defender or the attacker, when you're dealing with a street self-defense type scenario, the last place you want to go is to the ground. And here's why. When I'm in a one-on-one situation here with Jeff, we're going to fight, the fight is coming, boom, he's throwing punches, bomb, bomb, I'm blocking, we're doing whatever. I come in, I take the double leg takedown. I get to the top, and I'm on him. And here I'm more. I'm punching, bomb, I drop elbows on him and stuff like that. And then now, what happens is there's the second attacker. He doesn't know if I'm the defender or the attacker. He comes up from behind, and guess what I get? A big whack! Oh, and I'm down the ground. Now as I'm here, I'm getting attacked. Fighting on the ground, there is never going to be the surety that a second person is not going to come into it. Chris came in. He didn't know if I was the attacker. He didn't know if I was the defender. All he saw was a fight coming. He comes from behind, he attacks me from behind with a blunt force object. Could be a stick, a tree branch, a pull stick. It could be a tire iron. I'm on the ground. I can't see behind me. I'm thinking I'm in a position of superiority, and then all of a sudden, I'm attacked from behind from a second attacker. Multiple attacks on the ground, not a good idea. Okay, one scenario you may be posed with is you're sitting down and you're approached by multiple attackers. In this instance, I'm sitting in a high back bar stool. So I may be sitting at the bar, turn this way here. One attacker comes here to the side of me. And as I turn to face my threat, I notice I have a second attacker here in my periphery. Now, as I'm sitting here in the chair, sometimes if there are objects within your surroundings that you can use to your advantage, do so. In this case, I'm going to use this chair. Now, a couple of things that I can do is when I stand up, I'm going to have to deal with Chris first because he's closest to me and he's unimpeded to me. But as I stand, I'm going to strike to push him away. I'm going to grab this chair with my other hand and throw it down here in front of Jeff. Continuing with Chris, boom, and then come in here and deal with him as I go. Another option I may have, as I turn, I'm dealing here with Chris. I'm going to push him out of the way. I'll grab the leg of the chair and pick it up and use it against him here. Come back into Chris, finish from here. Use what you have around you. Use them wisely. If there's bottles on the bar, strike with one of those. If you have glasses on, use an improvised weapon. Pull those off. Maybe you can poke them with that. If there's bowl of chips, popcorn, throw it in their face. Hot liquids, coffee, soup, chili, whatever. Throw it at them. Use whatever you can to distract them. Going back to the SAFE, an acronym now. If I'm in a crowded area, such as a bar, I'm going to have to quickly apply combatives to them and get away safely. I'm not going to have the time, I'm not going to have the space in order to engage them fully, so I give my initial attacks and then I escape safely. Movement with multiple attackers. What we're going to demonstrate now is an avoidance drill. There's no combatives within this drill. What this does, this helps you work and learn how to move in semicircular movements so that you can keep one person between you and the furthest attacker. When you're doing this, it's good to have 2, maybe 3 other people to practice this with you. Okay, and this is just quite simply the avoidance drill. So as I start here, I have my multiple attackers here in front of me. What I'm going to do is I want to move in a semicircular motion so that as I work, I keep one between me and the furthest one. Now the furthest one is going to be able to come around and catch up to me eventually, which is fine. I can grab him, move him, put him in front of me. And I'm here, and I want to keep moving. Now notice, I'm not splitting between the two. If I split between the two, they can get me, alright? So as we keep moving, coming around outside. Keep my hands up. I'm using side-to-side footwork. I'm not trying to cross over. I want to keep side-to-side footwork. And I'm working just like I would if I were doing a sports drill. Now, one thing you have to remember, running like this is never always going to be the objective, because your backwards defensive speed is going to be slower than their forward offensive speed. You're working twice as hard to get twice as far away. Just at 45, 50 seconds of demonstration, I'm already winded. When you're winded like this, you don't start to think straight. You have trouble coordinating combatives in order to keep them off of you. So another thing that you can do is we can work on, as we're going, I'm moving, avoidance drill, pop, 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 and then pop, pop, split. Big mistake. However, he was moving away, so the split is okay. I keep moving around the outside. Strike, strike. Coming through. Strike, strike. Practice light striking. Watch your defensive position. Strike, strike. Use him as a shield. Strike. Down to the ground he goes. Made a fatal flaw, but he's down. I'm still up. I'm moving away. Multiple attackers, avoidance drill. What we're going to be doing now is a variation of the avoidance drill. What I'm going to do is my training partners are going to be having pads. One thing you want to ensure that when you're moving, you want to keep your hands up. Moving laterally, moving defensively, keeping your hands up, using your hands and your arms to protect your head and your body. What my partners are going to be doing now is as I'm moving around, they're going to be popping me with the pad, pushing into me with the pad, training me to keep my hands up as I'm going. It's also going to initially throw me off balance a little bit, which is good, okay? Because you have to expect the unexpected. You're going to be using light to moderate force with this. As you get better and more experienced and want to have more fun with this, with your training partners, you can use even more force to try to knock the person down. So as I'm moving, my hands are up. Strike, strike, strike. Keeping my feet moving. Moving around the outside. dealing with just one at a time. Sort of similar to a football. Interrupt. Now I'm in the corner, but I gotta move. Move last. Don't stop and get stuck in the corner. Now here's where I would apply additional combatants. We're at this distance now. They know they're not getting in. Now as they come in, now I start to strike. Front kicks. Palm heel strikes to the face. Knee strikes as they're coming in. To really let them have it. The more realistic you make your drills, the better prepared you will be if the situation arises.
Going back into the techniques. Long-range techniques are the safest techniques to throw because I'm using my longest weapon to the greatest advantage. I want to remain safe. So, throwing a technique from a long range, okay, can be enhanced by incorporating a couple of key points that we use within Israeli Krav Maga, which is the style of Krav Maga that I practice. The first one is the front kick to the groin. Now, anytime we throw a front kick or front motion kick, I want to employ what is called the glisha. Now, glisha is just a rotation of my hips into the target by rotating around on the ball of my base foot. Okay? So, as I'm standing here, many times you're not going to be prepared standing in a fighting stance to make this type of kick, where I'm standing back here like this, or I'm standing back here like this. Sometimes I need to react quickly. I need to go from 0 to 10 in the snap of an eye. Okay? So what I'm going to do is Chris is going to hold the pad down here at groin height, and I want to start to develop my reaction and my kicking from the neutral stance here first with my left and my right leg. Every time I kick, I bring my hands up, I rotate on the ball of my base foot, and I bring my hip forward into the target. Ish. 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 Now, throwing this kick from a fighting stance will allow me to generate more force because it's coming from a further distance. So as I'm in my fighting stance, ish, 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 ish. Now, throwing these kicks against multiple attackers. One to the left of me, one here to the right. I want to generate as much force as possible out of each technique, efficiently and effectively. So, dependent upon their orientation, will determine which leg I'm going to kick with first. If Chris is oriented more with his hip back to the right, or is in a more traditional fighting stance, I'm not going to be able to get into the groin with my right leg from the outside. Now I'm going to have to kick with my left to achieve the target, which is his groin. So as I'm standing here, Jeff will hold his head down as well. I'm going to kick here, put my foot back now as part of my movement so that when I rotate my hip into the next target, I'm kicking as effectively and efficiently as possible. I don't want to start getting into this and this here. Far too much footwork, far too much waste of time. So as I'm here, I make 1, 2. If Jeff is closest to me here to my right, 1, 2. Rotation of my hips and shoulders into the target. Turn your body. Generate as much force as possible in order to be efficient and effective. Long-range techniques. Best thing that you can start off with, make sure they're efficient and effective.
Striking, preemptive strike into the first target, then into the second target. Now, combinations can be discussed ad nauseum. Many different scenarios will require many different types of combinations, okay? One of the most common ones will be, is I'm going to have to transition from a long range techniques, which will be my initial strike, which front kick to the groin. Second attacker is not going to be waiting until it's his turn to confront me. What he's going to do, as soon as I make my first move, he's going to move in with his second move. As he's closing the distance on me, my long range technique is probably not going to work because he's no longer in a long range. So I'm going to have to go into an intermediary or close range type technique, which is the knee strike. And in this case, I'm going to employ a thrusting knee strike. Now, I'm going to have to watch out for this because as he's moving in to close the distance, he's probably rushing in to throw a punch. So I'm going to have to employ the thrusting knee strike so I move my upper body out of the way from that punch as he walks into it. So, as I'm going to start off first here, I make my rear leg kick, boom, here to the groin to Chris, and then I'm going to come in here with my knee strike to the pad. Can't effectively strike the pad with force and also try to simulate him coming in with an overhand punch or haymaker punch type technique. So just make sure when you're making your knee strike, you're leaning back far enough away to keep from being struck by the second technique or the overhand punch coming from the second attacker. So as we're here, I'm going to strike, striking in here. And then I reset again. Reset. Practice firing off. Reset. Reset again. So, transitioning from left to right, working against an advancing attacker. When you're doing this, don't just go left, right, or right, left. Reset each time. Develop your reactionary strikes. Develop going from 0 to 10. You have to explode into the technique. Don't just, don't become robotic. It doesn't work that way. You have to wait. You have to create patience. You also have to develop reactionary speed, reactionary time. And just relax. Long range to short range or intermediary strikes to an oncoming second attacker. Now, one of the techniques we talked about was the back kick. How do we train the back kick? It's a pretty devastating technique when it's done correctly, and it's one of the things that you'll have to practice because it does require a little bit of coordination and a little bit of balance, okay? One of the things you want to concern yourself with is that you are being attacked from behind. If the person is attacking you from behind, he's trying to elicit a surprise attack. So they're going to be coming in with a blunt force object, a stick, or a club, or something of that nature, or a punch to the back of your head. So you want to control the amount of surface area that you are going to expose to the oncoming attacker. Now, as I said before, when you get around horses, one of the first things that they tell you is do not approach a horse or go around behind the horse because they'll get spooked. Okay, because it's a very strong, very powerful technique. It's clean, it's efficient, and it's effective. So, when we're training the back kick in a situation such as this, I'm going to have my partner stand behind me with the pad. I want to first, when I make sure, when I turn and I look, I want to be able to spot the target with both of my eyes. When I spot the target with both of my eyes, I'm ensure that I hit it. If I see it with just one, I won't. So when you turn and you look around your shoulder here like this. Don't rotate your hips into it as well because then you're exposing the side of your face and your face forward, and your hips are now in a different alignment to make the kick. I want to turn and I want to look around my shoulder here like this. I don't want to look up and over. This is a lot easier, but again, it exposes my face. So, when I turn and I look at the target. I pick up the target with both of my eyes. If I'm too far away from it, right now I can judge because I'm looking with two eyes, I'm not close enough in order to hit it. So I may have to make a slight step back with my opposite leg that I intend to kick with. In this case, I'm going to kick with my left leg because I'm balanced best on my right. I step, and I strike. When you strike, heels up into the target. So as I'm here, hands up, counterbalancing my way forward with my hands, I turn, I look, I step, and I strike. Turn, turn, look around my shoulder, step, be up and strike. Try to coordinate it. At first it's going to be a little bit awkward, and eventually you get into it. Try not to hit with your toes here like this. Reaching, don't reach. Move towards it. Up, and in. Up, and in. Now, in the multiple attacker type scenario, person in front, person behind. Again now, using your first impression. Who am I going to hit first? Who is closest to me? Who has a weapon? You have to determine that. Guy behind me, don't know if he's got a weapon, but I know there's somebody there. So if I'm in a situation here where Chris is in front of me, Jeff is behind me. Chris is closest to me. Now, I can't quite use so much of a long-range type technique into here. So if he's this close to me, I'll demonstrate first with a knee, strike, and a step back. As Jeff closes the distance, I hit him with a back kick. Okay? Looks sort of movie-ish, but you know what? This can happen. I can get where I'm started with the both of them in front of me. One will peel off from behind me. I've got to deal with one. I give to him. I give to him. Now, with my rule, going into the second attacker, I strike him. I disorient him. I strike here with the back kick. I'll quickly close the distance on Jeff, pull him, and use him now in between the two of us. Come back to Chris and continue to fight there. Or I may start here, give to here. That might be enough. Come back into here, spin him around, put him in between us here. Combination situations can be discussed ad nauseum. Is any one of them right? Yes. Is any one of them wrong? Yes. Go with what happens. Attacker from behind, you're giving up your back, not very good, not a good tactical move. However, being able to deal with it is not as hard as you think. The back kick is a long-range technique, it's highly effective, and it's highly efficient. You have to determine yourself whether or not you want to go after that one again, or go back to the first attacker. Use whatever the situation and scenario lends itself to. Dealing with the back kick with an attacker from behind. Now let's deal with the close quarter technique. I talked before about how sometimes the punch is not exactly the go-to technique. If you're not conditioned, if you're not prepared, if you're not trained to properly throw that punch, you can hit your punch and take yourself right out of the fight. So I prefer to use a palm heel strike. Palm heel strikes work well for men, women, children, okay, because it's not dependent upon the strength of your hand and the size of your hand. The palm heel strike is basically like poking somebody in the face or into the body with the end of the baseball bat. Okay, so to train the palm heel strikes, we're going to be using these tombstone pads. Okay, closer. When I make the palm heel strike, I'm hitting with the bottom part of my hand here like this. I want to pull my fingers back and in, because in this case scenario where if I'm striking and my thumb is out, if I miss, if I'm palm heel striking to the face and he turns his head, I'm going to break my thumb off. Okay, or if I'm striking with my fingers are open, I strike to the chest, I could get a finger caught in a shirt and pull it out and maybe break the end of my finger. Okay, any of these joints will prohibit me from being able to use this hand anymore once it's damaged. So what I want to do is when I make my palm heel strike, I bring my hands up, I strike out through the center of my body. Imaginary line that runs right down the center of my body here. I want to strike through that line. My hands come up, I rotate my hips and my shoulders. My whole body goes into the strike here. And I'm pushing as I'm making contact and striking. And I'm using my left and my right from the neutral stance, okay, and then the fighting stance, from here, I just want to strike. I want to use to generate force. Now, the strike hits, and it comes back. You see Chris is bouncing off of my strikes. I'm not merely pushing him, I'm striking him. Okay, hands are up, and I'm here. Left and right from an initial stance, from a reaction stance, from a fighting stance, whatever you want. I'm in, and I'm out. Now, elbow strikes. Striking with the elbow. Put a finger on your end of your elbow, the point of your elbow. Draw your fingers across. This is the striking area you want to strike with. Turn your palm away, and you're hitting here. You want to hit from an upward to a downward angle so that you're dropping your weight into the target. Okay? You can do this from a reactionary stance or a neutral stance, from a fighting stance, stepping into it any which way. Drop the elbow on it. So as the pad comes in here, I'm striking here to the clavicle or either the side of the head or into the jaw. I'll show on Chris in a second, combined together with a knee strike to the back of the head. So as I'm here, and this whole drill is about learning how to develop power and force, okay? Not strength in the technique. Okay? Elbow strikes into the target. Now, as I'm going to demonstrate now, elbow strikes to the back of the head. If I come in and I engage Chris like we're doing in our multiple attacker type scenario, and I'm striking here into the knee, with the knee into the body, his head comes down. I'm striking from an upward angle to a downward angle to the back of the head, hopefully driving him down to the ground. Okay? Highly effective, highly efficient target area here to the back of the head, at the base of the skull. Not here, but here. I'm coming through and I'm hitting him here to the back of the head. Take your time. You just hit him in the groin, hit him in the body with a knee strike. He's going to be bent over and stunned. Take your time, acquire your target, hit it with the right technique. So as I'm going to practice that, these are just basic drop elbows, where I'm just going to learn how to develop downward force into the target. I don't have to hit it very hard, I just have to develop downward force. Just here. Body up, body down, position your arm in the proper position to make the contact. Don't really want to strike here like this, because then you will damage your elbow, but from here, you can control the surface area that's making contact, and just developing and delivering downward force angle and downward force power into your technique. Close quarters techniques, palm heel strikes, elbow strikes, very, very, very highly effective, very, very highly efficient when done properly. So that was my presentation on defending against multiple attackers. A multiple attack is a probable type of attack which will be perpetrated upon somebody, especially with the fact that most people do not go out alone. If you go out, you're probably going out with someone as well. You can pretty much gather that other people are going out in groups as well, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals. The more the social event or the more the social atmosphere is going to be, the more probable it will be that there will be multiple people in a group. Depending upon what the situation or the scenario presents itself as, you will have to deal with the multiple attacker. When you're going into a situation that you're not quite familiar with or comfortable with, I use the acronym SAFE. S-A-F-E. S is for surroundings, A is for awareness, F is for first impressions, and E is for the escape. Make sure you have an escape. When you're posed with an attack by multiple attackers, you have to employ also proximity delineations. You have to understand that you're either going to fight or you're going to fly. When they're further away from you, 8, 10, 12 feet, you have the flight option. When you're within 8 to 6 feet, you're in a fight or flight option. And when you're much closer than that and your bells and whistles are going off and red lights are going off in your head, it's time to fight. When you're fighting, ensure that you're using long-range techniques first. Long-range techniques are most effective and most efficient. Movement. Keep moving. Don't stand still. Try to keep one person between you and the furthest attacker. Don't get cornered. If you get cornered, you have to fight real hard to get out of that corner and avoid at all costs splitting between the two attackers. Keep your lateral movement going. Don't cross your feet over, moving side to side. Keep your hands up to protect yourself at all times from either strikes or being thrown or pushed off balance. When you engage one of the attackers after the first strike or the secondary strike, don't get too locked up with them. If you can lock up with them, they can lock up with you. Avoid going to the ground. The ground fight in a multiple attacker type scenario is not a good idea. Sometimes even when you're faced with a single attacker, you never know, the surprise second attacker can come in from behind. This may be an innocent bystander that has no idea whether or not you're the attacker or the defender. They can come in and they can kick, strike, punch, hit you with something, whatever the case may be. First and foremost, when you're dealing with any type of self-defense scenario, it's 90% mental, 10% physical. You have to get over your fear. You have to feel that if you're being threatened, you need to fight back. You need to fight back in such a way that you can disengage from the situation and then get away safely. Doesn't mean you have to put out a protracted fight, a 10-round championship fight. Okay? Strike with what you can, when you can, efficiently, effectively, and then get away. And remember, stay safe.
Bert, you've practiced you've taken training, you become an instructor in several different martial arts styles, several different fighting systems. What was it specifically about Krav Maga that when you started practicing, you said, you know what, this is the main fighting system that I want to train with and that I want to instruct in?
Well, unlike traditional martial art programs where you learn the particular aspects of a technique all the way through, and then later on through different training as you become more advanced in the traditional type programs, you start to apply what you're learning to a self-defense type scenario. With Krav Maga, the intention in Krav Maga is to use instinctual type movements and to be able to use what you learn and apply it that day if you have to. I mean, every class starts with technique training, and then there's drills that we do with the technique, and then there's a reality-based scenario that we try to incorporate those techniques into so that you see how these techniques are applied to a scenario in which you may be threatened. These types of programs, which Krav Maga gives, are not indicative to what you find in a traditional martial arts type program.
What is it about Krav Maga specifically when it's differentiated from other reality-based systems that are out there or traditional martial arts? What is it that makes it so applicable to reality-based self-defense scenarios?
Well, Krav Maga was developed for the state of Israel by an individual named Imi Lichtenfeld. He was a Czechoslovakian immigrant who immigrated to Israel, which wasn't Israel at the time, which was Palestine at the time, after World War II. He left Czechoslovakia because of the fascist regime that was coming into Czechoslovakia, and they were targeting Jewish individuals. Now, what had happened was Imi and his friends had started to go out and start to defend Jewish individuals within their neighborhood from some of the fascists, and they became very proficient at defending the Jews within their area, so their fighting proficiency started to come up pretty high. They ended up leaving Czechoslovakia because they were being targeted by the fascists to take them out because they were becoming so effective. So what he had done is he had left Czechoslovakia, and I mean his history and his story is well documented in a couple of different things if you look through the history of Krav Maga. But as he came through, he ended up joining the Northern African forces on the side of the Allies fighting against fascism in Africa. And then after World War II, he ended up in Palestine, and he was used by the Haganah, which was the freedom fighters at the time, in order to develop a fighting system for the Haganah soldiers. After the establishment of the State of Israel, he was asked by the State of Israel to put together a fighting and fitness system for the Israeli Defense Forces. He, at that time, had been very skilled in boxing. He had won medals as an amateur boxer during his time in Czechoslovakia, and he also did at what the time they called gymnastics, which was probably more closer to judo or jiu-jitsu at the time. And with his skills, he was able to develop a fighting system that was easily taught to the troops of the Israeli Defense Forces, did not require a whole lot of training to become proficient in it because it was based upon instinctual type movements. Somebody grabs your throat, you go after the hands. You don't necessarily start striking other areas. You go after what's instinctual. Somebody throws a punch at you, you raise your arm up to block. I mean, these are some of the basic principles within Krav Maga, which make it very applicable to a street type scenario where you're threatened by somebody where you really don't know what they're going to do. Somebody throws a punch, you raise your arm with a block. Somebody grabs you by the arm, you pull your arm away. These are things that are indicative to a Krav Maga type program because they're based upon instinctual movements.
Bert, there's been so much attention in media around Krav Maga now in the last several years, and it's become really, really popular. What is it in how Krav Maga was developed that it became so experientially based in reality-based training, and why it became so applicable, and why people really kind of latched onto it as this is a system that's really geared for the street?
First up, there's nothing fancy in Krav Maga. There's no big fancy throws, there's no jump spinning kicks, there's nothing of that nature. It's very concise, to the point, close the distance quickly. You want to deliver as devastating a technique as possible that you can, and then you move on to the next target, or you get away safely. I mean, one of the things that Emi had always said is that so that one may walk in peace, that's why he developed Krav Maga, but it also says when you walk away, leave them lying in pieces. That's sort of my add-on, because everything that they do within Krav Maga is close the distance quickly, maybe even using a preemptive strike, applying devastating force, and then either getting away safely or moving on to the next target. You know, and that's why sometimes what happens in today's day and age in reality-type street scenarios, you're dealing with multiple attackers. You're not dealing with just one person. You're going to be dealing with multiple attackers, so you always have to take into consideration how many people are there, okay? You don't want to spend a whole lot of time throwing, 5, 6, 7 punch technique combinations against one attacker. You want to kick, you want to hit. Hopefully that will be enough to either distract them or take them out of the fight for a short time so that you can move on to the next target, apply defensive tactics against that target, and then move back to the next one if you need to, or if you have developed enough of a... If you have defended yourself proficiently against them, you can get away safely.
Nowadays, there's so many different martial arts and fighting systems that focus on one-on-one type hand-to-hand combat or hand-to-weapon training. But when it comes to multiple attackers, how realistic is it that you'd be facing multiple attackers in a self-defense scenario? Or, is it a probability? Is it a possibility? Would it most likely never happen at all? Just how likely is it?
Well, multiple attackers is more of a reality right now than ever before. Just recently here in Chicago, 2 years ago, they had a string of crimes that were perpetrated against people in Lincoln Park. And almost every time there was more than one attacker. Now there was more than one victim. It was usually a male and a female, and 2 male attackers would attack the male of the male-female group. Also, what had happened in one instance, there was a male-female attacking group. It doesn't matter if it's a male or a female. The male could be coming with a cold weapon or a blunt force object weapon, such as a bat or a club, or what happened in one case was he used a plank from a pallet. The other woman had a gun. So what had happened is the male approached from behind, struck him with the blunt force object, and then the woman would cover him with the weapon, with the gun, and then they would be robbed, and then they would leave. So multiple attackers is quite a realistic scenario that you will encounter. Also, if you're in a bar or in a club, how many people really go out to a bar or a club by themselves? How many people go to a restaurant by themselves? Okay? The probability of dealing with a multiple attacker in a self-defense scenario is very high. And it's one thing that a lot of people in a lot of traditional martial arts programs do not take into consideration. Krav Maga deals with this specifically because as this is trained for the Israeli defense soldier, they're going in a group against another group. Could be a group of protesters, could be a group of teenagers, could be a group of settlers, whatever the case is. And in the instance that one of the Israeli Defense Forces soldiers becomes separated from the rest of his group, he is more likely to be faced by a group of whatever the adversary is going to be of multiple numbers, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals. Yes, he will be armed, but in close quarters type situations, that armament usually isn't going to take precedent as part of your defense, because using a long gun when you've got 3, 4 people within 3, 4 feet of you isn't going to be a very practical weapon to use, particularly if those attackers, protesters, whatever they're going to be, aren't armed themselves. So there still are rules of engagements that you have to follow, but if they're coming after you with a stick or a knife or throwing rocks at you or whatever the case is, you have to deal with that. So this is how Krav Maga has developed this type of thinking towards multiple attackers. And multiple attackers is a reality everywhere. You know, it's not something that is just what you see on TV. You know, the guy comes out of the bar by himself and he's confronted by 3 bikers. That happens. You know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bikers, but you could be in there with you and a friend, and then there's a group of 5 guys that want to play pool. So now you've got 2 against 5. That's the reality too. So 1 against 3, 2 against 5, 1 against 2. Whatever the case is, there's always going to be the chance of a multiple attacker type scenario.
Bert, you have an acronym that you use for applying self-defense techniques and awareness against a real situation when you're out there in the public. You call it SAFE, S-A-F-E. Explain a little bit about what SAFE is and how it applies to being able to protect yourself in a public environment.
An acronym that I use, which is SAFE, and an acronym is a word where each letter within the word stands for something. And I use SAFE. In a self-defense type scenario or any type of scenario, wherever you're going, particularly if you're going to some place that you're not familiar with, you want to run through this in your head. S-A-F-E. S stands for surroundings. Be aware of your surroundings. Take a look at what's in your surroundings when you go. Awareness. Be aware of what's in the surroundings. Car is quite not, that's a little bit out of place. Some individuals are out of place. They're either paying close attention to people or they're paying no attention at all. They don't quite look like they belong there. So you have to be aware of all of this within the surroundings. F is for first impression. First impression is probably going to be right. You know, it's always better to ask for forgiveness sometimes than to ask for permission. So if your first impression tells you, you know what, something's just not right in the area here, I'm being aware of this, and within the surroundings it just is out of place, I know something's wrong. So then you need your escape, which is E. Either turn around and go back the way that you came, or make sure that if you walk into something that you always have a second way out. Be aware of what your exit strategy is going to be. Be aware of what your escape would be. Either it's fight or flight. You have to take all these into consideration, particularly if you're going into a situation, a scenario, or someplace that you're not really familiar or comfortable with.